During ancient Israel's trek to the Promised Land through the thick and deadly darkness called the shadow of death, there was a light that shined upon them. According to Isaiah, it was a great light. The great light that shone upon Israel referred to a celestial object. The Hebrew for the English term great light in Isaiah is identical to the Hebrew also translated as great light in Genesis, when designating the creation of the sun and moon. The sense of Isaiah's statement is that there was a bright celestial object visible in the dark sky of the shadow of death. The great light of Isaiah was not the sun or the moon. These two lights were not visible during the 40 years of the wandering of Israel, as we noted previously. That leaves us with the three planets of the polar configuration.
Emanuel Velikovsky, who was unaware of the polar configuration,
identified the luminary as the planet Venus. He pointed out that the original Hebrew contains the name of the planet Noga. However, the name is not translated as such. Using this identification, Velikovsky modified the King James Version to include Noga as a name. It is possible that Venus was the great light seen by the ancient Israelites. If it had flared with a bright burst of light, the planet might have become visible, even in the oppressive darkness of the shadow of death. However, the planet Mars is a more likely candidate for the great light seen by those that walked in darkness. Granted that Noga is the name of the planet Venus, but it was also applied to Lucifer, the morning star. It was Mars, not Venus, which was the morning star of the ancient world, as we pointed out in an earlier series. Furthermore, it was Mars, not Venus, which guided the Israelites through the wilderness as the angel of the presence of the Lord, and it was Mars that provided the pillar of fire and cloud. It was Mars, as the angel of the presence, who led Israel out of the darkness into the light of the Promised Land. Another reason to believe that the great light seen by those sitting in darkness was Mars is that Isaiah's statement was used to symbolize Jesus Christ and his gospel. For example, the prophet Micah exalted to his enemy that if he ever sat in darkness, the Lord would provide light. Isaiah used his own imagery to symbolize the Lord's appearance to the spirits in prison. When Zacharias finally opened his mouth after being struck dumb by the angel Gabriel, he rejoiced that his newborn son, John, would give the gospel light to those who sat in the darkness of ignorance. This same imagery, the sitting in darkness and the great light, has been used repeatedly in our dispensation. In an 1831 revelation to Joseph Smith, the Lord commanded Sidney Gilbert to buy a store and to send goods to the saints, thus enabling the preaching of the gospel to those who sat in darkness. In another revelation, the Lord prophesied that the light of the fullness of the gospel shall break forth among the Gentiles. When relating his vision of the Savior's visit to the spirits of the dead, President Joseph F. Smith referred to the image obliquely. The light was the gospel carried by the missionary forces organized by the Savior.
The general formula used is as follows.
Sitting or walking in the shadow of death represents spiritual death, whether through ignorance of the gospel or by incarceration in spirit prison. The great light represents Jesus Christ, his gospel, and those that proclaim the gospel. The use of the great light to represent Jesus Christ and his gospel is more in harmony with Mars as the light than with Venus. Venus represents female characters, while Mars is the symbol of male heroes, especially Jesus Christ. After all, it is his star.